She'd been walking for 3 days when the last of her strength gave out. The road behind her was nothing but dust and silence, the kind that swallows footsteps and prayers alike. No one knew her name. No one cared where she came from. But by the time her body fell into the dirt that morning, beneath the blazing sun of the New Mexico territory, her story had already begun to echo across the desert. Her name was Evelyn Hart, and once she had been a teacher. In the spring of 1882, a small-town schoolhouse in Dry Creek closed its doors. The railroad had shifted routes, the families had moved on, and the town, like so many in those years, began to fade from the maps. Evelyn had nowhere to go, no husband, no kin. Just a suitcase of lesson plans, a Bible, and a single letter of recommendation that no one ever asked for. She'd taught children how to read under candlelight, how to find constellations, how to dream of more than fences and cattle. But now, with no one left to teach, she was just a woman with worn shoes and an empty stomach. So she walked. They said the next town, Red Hollow, was 100 miles south, a place where ranchers were rich and the land was still kind. Maybe there she could find work, maybe even purpose. For the first 20 miles, she sang to herself to keep the loneliness away. By 40, she'd stopped singing. By 60, her lips were cracked, her shoes torn, and the letters in her bag felt heavier than stone. She kept walking, through sandstorms, through thirst, through the kind of hunger that turns the world into haze. Out on the far ridge, Calder Boone, a wealthy cattleman, was riding home from town. He wasn't much older than 35, though the lines on his face told stories of years that had carved him deeper than his age should be allowed. He'd made his fortune driving cattle from Texas to Colorado, the kind of man who could turn dust into gold. But all the gold in the world couldn't he bring back what he'd lost, a wife and child buried in the valley below his ranch. Gone to fever 3 winters past. Since then, he'd lived quiet, no laughter, no guests, just the wind and the work. He believed some lives were meant to be lived alone, until that day. He saw her from half a mile off, a figure staggering through the heat waves, her dress in tatters, hair plastered to her face, clutching a satchel that looked far too heavy for her size. At first, he thought she was a mirage. Then he saw her fall, just drop like the world had finally decided to let her go. Calder spurred his horse hard, galloping across the flat, the hooves kicking up clouds of dust that blurred the horizon. When he reached her, she was barely breathing. Her lips were white, her pulse faint, but she was alive. He lifted her gently, laid her across his saddle, and rode for the ranch without a word. Evelyn awoke 2 days later to the smell of coffee and rain. The room around her was quiet, wooden walls, a single window, a worn quilt tucked to her chin. She thought she was dreaming until she saw the man sitting by the stove, polishing a revolver with one hand and holding a book in the other. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "You gave me quite the scare." "Where am I?" she asked, her throat dry as bone. "Boone Ranch," he said. "Lucky my horse spooked when he did, or I might have missed you." She blinked at him, this tall, broad man with tired eyes and a clean shirt that still somehow looked lonely. He nodded toward the table. "There's stew, if you can keep it down." She tried to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. She hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. When she finally managed a few bites, he asked, "What were you doing out there?" "That's a long walk for a lady alone." Evelyn hesitated, then said softly, "I'm a schoolteacher." "Or I was. I heard Red Hollow needed one." "I didn't have fare for the stage." He studied her for a long time. 100 miles, he murmured. "That's more grit than most men I've hired." Over the next few days, she regained her strength. She offered to help in the kitchen, to earn her keep. Boone agreed. She cleaned the house, mended clothes, read by the fire when the nights grew cold. Sometimes she caught Boone watching her, not with desire, but with a quiet curiosity. He'd ask about her lessons, her students, the books she'd loved. And once she asked him why a man like him, rich, handsome, with land that touched the horizon, lived so alone. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee, sat beside her and said, "Because the world took everything I tried to love." She nodded, understanding in the kind of way only another lonely soul could. Weeks passed. The desert bloomed with spring wildflowers and laughter soft, Uncertain laughter turned to the Boone Ranch. Evelyn had a way of bringing life back into quiet places. Then one morning, Boone saddled his horse early. "I'm heading into Red Hollow," he said. "You said you were going there, remember?" Her heart sank. "You're sending me away?" He shook his head slowly. "No, Miss Hart. I'm taking you there. You've got a job waiting." "Rode ahead to the schoolmaster myself." Her eyes welled up. "You didn't have to, I know," he said, cutting her off with a small smile. "But I wanted to." They rode together through the valley, the sun breaking over the ridge, painting the desert gold. She looked at him, at the man who had once buried his heart, and saw something fragile stirring in his eyes. When they reached Red Hollow, the townsfolk were waiting. The schoolhouse stood proud again, its bell shining new in the morning light. Boone dismounted and handed her the reins. "Looks like you found your place," he said quietly. But something in her heart ached. Shh. She looked at the road behind them, mapped the miles of dust and silence they'd left behind, and whispered, "I already had." He looked up, confused, until she stepped closer. "I can teach anywhere," she said softly. "But some lessons I've only just begun to learn." For the first time in years, Boone smiled. Not polite, not guarded, but real. And for a long moment, neither of them moved, standing in the warm breath of the morning, surrounded by the sound of life beginning again. Months later, travelers passing through Red Hollow spoke of a new school, teacher a kind woman with a gentle voice, and a cowboy who came by each Friday with flowers wrapped in twine. No one knew their story, not all of it. But they could see it in the way she looked at him when he rode away, and the way he always turned back, tipping his hat before disappearing down the trail. They said she saved him as much as he saved her. And maybe that's what the desert teaches best, that even in a land built from dust and sorrow, two souls can still find one another, not by luck, but by need. Sometimes salvation doesn't ride in with thunder or gold, it walks quietly, one aching step after another, until someone finally decides to stop and care. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Wild Tales Storytelling, where every whisper of the past carries the warmth of hope, heartbreak, and the wild spirit of the human soul.